Hello and welcome to lesson 13 of 21 for 21, 21 lessons about sport and media in the 21st century. I'm Stuart here in Germany.
And I'm Jamie here in Barcelona. And we're joined this week by a really exciting guest. He is a sports journalist. He seems to have interviewed an awful lot of very interesting people himself. And I'm sure he's going to tell us all about that and all the different people he's spoken with. It's Tom Ward, who is a sports journalist, specifically working in combat sports and I think a little bit of football as well, having snooped. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Hello, hello, hello. Well, thank you for having me on, boys. I've been looking forward to this, as I said before we started recording, all damn week. And thankfully for all the viewers, they can't actually see my notes on the side of the screen. So a little bit of a trade secret for you. Yes, I do prepare.
Well, we'll get into that later, I guess, because we invited Tom on today to talk with us about the work that he does and how he got there. Because a lot of people end up working in sport media because they've got a true passion for sport or for storytelling or both. And so I'm looking forward to hearing a bit about Tom's experience and yeah, any advice that he's got for people that want to get into this line of work. So let's kick off then, Tom. Maybe you could tell us just a little bit about yourself and where you are, and maybe a bit of your kind of your normal day to day. Although maybe not, no 2 days are the same.
Well, I guess I'll probably start off by saying thank you, boys, for having me on. I'm a massive fan of Jamie and all the content that he creates. So it's quite nice to, finally meet you guys virtually, face to face. But yeah, no, I'm Tom. I work for GiveMeSport. More specifically, I'm the combat sports lead, boxing, MMA, sometimes a bit of karate, sometimes, 30 fight MMA fights, 30 fighters MMA fights, all that kind of stuff. But I kind of had a bit of a strange journey into the world of journalism. I mean, I went to university, came out about 3 years ago. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did history and politics, and I quickly decided that I didn't want to be a history teacher or go into politics. So yeah, I was a bit stumped. Did a couple of TV runner jobs here and there, but then I sort of decided that just wasn't for me. It's a bit too, ruthless and competitive. So I thought, oh, why not try and get into the equally ruthless and competitive world of journalism? I somehow stumbled across this job opening at Snack, which is, Snack Media is a publishing house of its own right. We're in hundreds of different websites, GiveMeSport, Football Fancast, Transfer Tavern, quite a few others as well. And I just saw this job opening really for a football writer's job. And I thought to myself, oh, I kind of fancy this, football writing malarkey. I'd done student newspaper and I'd done, a bit of student radio, not very well, as you can probably tell by this. And, things like that. And I've done a couple of stints at like local newspapers, but nothing too serious. And I kind of not really applied as a joke, but I didn't think I'd have the experience or whatever to get it. I think I probably didn't set myself up right because turns out my boss is a massive Spurs fan, and I spent the entirety of the interview slagging off Jermaine Genius. Apologies, Jermaine. I love you, really. I'm a Chelsea fan, so that's probably why. But anyway, that's by the by. Got the job. And about a week later, the pandemic hit. So I was in my office last year for about approximately 8 hours all told. And then spent the rest in my bedroom at home trying to convince my family that I did, yes, actually have a job. Here we are. No, it was good, and it was it was a nice little venture into the world of journalism. Writing news reports every day, football like gaming reports, transfer updates, all that kind of thing. And I kind of quickly realised that I loved it. I managed to interview Harrison Kanu, Louis Saha, like a bunch of really cool footballers. And that was the part that I enjoyed. I loved interviewing people. I love chatting, as you can probably tell, because that's what like a paragraph, and I haven't finished yet. But I quickly realised that I do love talking to people. I love interviewing special guests and whatever. So I just thought, okay, let's try something a bit different. I'd had this terrible, it doesn't exist anymore, so don't go looking for it. But I had this terrible MMA blog at university, just a little WordPress thing that I'd set up. Because I mean, that's a whole nother tangent, but randomly, me and my flatmates, we decided to watch, I think it was like it was Michael Bisping or something. I think it might have been Bisping's last fight, because my friend was like, oh, this British guy's fighting. I think it was just after he lost to Georges St. Pierre, so it must have been the Kelvin Gastelum fight. And he got knocked out. And I was like, well, this sport isn't for me then. I mean, the Brits just lost. Like, what am I doing? Sorry, Bisping. Don't mean to throw you on the bus. And yeah, I started writing all these, news updates and all this kind of thing. But it wasn't, I wasn't taking it too seriously. But then other people started to take notice. Some Cage Warriors fighters got in touch, started interviewing them. I guess that kind of gave me the experience to, try my hand at interviewing footballers and everything like that. But MMA and boxing are my two biggest things. Like, I will probably be up at some unearthly hour in the morning tonight watching, some Japanese MMA card, which is on at like 3 a.m. in the morning. That's just what I'm like. But yeah, so MMA and boxing have always been my two things. And when the GiveMeSport vacancy came across, I kept on badgering my boss, being like, if you don't get an MMA site, I'm just going to start one myself. Like, and anyway, he finally gave in. Almost strong-armed him into it. No, not really. I think he kind of, we just had a few discussions here and there. Anyway, fast forward to January this year, joined GiveMeSport as the MMA boxing content lead, and I haven't left. So that either means that I'm doing a good job or they haven't found someone better. Choose whichever one it is.
Or maybe a little bit of both.
Probably.
There's a lot I want to sort of grasp.
Sorry, that was so long. I
No.
There's a whole week of excitement, Tom. Just all coming together. That's what we like to see.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm an MMA fan and specifically Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I feel like I could take this on another tangent, but let's try and focus on the sport media side of it. I also find it quite amusing that you've apologized to two quite big names on our little podcast as if they're going to be tuning in. If you are, hey, great, welcome, and
we apologize too.
Yeah. So yeah, there's absolutely loads going on there. That the first thing that stands out to me, and I'm connecting this maybe with the episode that we did with Tom Carter a few weeks back, which was about how he got into working in football social media. He said he bullied the clubs, and now you're here saying you're strong arming your boss into giving you an MMA section of the website. I think there's a secret, and I think Omar spoke about it as well. He was kind of being persistent in creating content and talking about Barca. There's sort of something that's maybe not really spoken about, which is that the persistency and insisting actually they do pay off if you manage to get a hold of the right people.
Absolutely. I think it kind of, I always pride myself on networking. I think I really enjoyed, as I said, chatting to people. And over the years, I mean, at university, I'd even pop into random boxing gyms and whatever and start chatting to the boxers, just young prospects or journeymen or whatever. But I kind of not really built up a reputation, but I built up a decent network of fighters and trainers. And I'd always say to my boss, like, oh, even when I was covering football, I'm chatting to Isaac Lowe, Tyson Fury's friend or whatever. And I think you kind of realize that there's, a whole another section to my contacts book that maybe we haven't really explored yet, which is probably why I gave you the chance rather than thinking, hang on a second, what am I doing here? I hope you don't regret it now, Martin. But yeah, it was, I do believe you've got to back yourself 100%. And you really do have to try and not necessarily persuade, but you've got to show someone why you can do the thing that you're trying to do, right? Like, unless you're driven and you've got that hunger and that desire to be not necessarily the best, but the best of your ability, then why is anyone else going to believe you? So I think a lot of it comes from, like, your own self-determination, perseverance, because it is a very competitive industry, even more so when you're working in sport media, as I'm sure you guys are both well aware. So it very much is a case of when that door's open, not necessarily bashing it down and giving them hell for leather, but just showing them, even if you're doing a couple of articles here and there just to tide you over, showing people what you can do is so important. I feel like there are two elements to journalism which to me stand out the most. It's you're only as good as your contacts book. So if you've got a massive deep contacts list, if you can phone up an agent or a manager or a footballer or a boxer or a fighter in my case, that stands you in such good stead. But you've also got to have that approachability and that trust. You've got to build that trust with these names, with these talents. So for me, that's the thing. It's not necessarily like, I don't personally believe that your degree defines you. Like, I did history and politics. I'm now working in journalism. I wouldn't say my writing style is boring, but I don't have that, traditional journalism background. But equally, I don't think that's something that should, deter people from wanting to be a journalist. I don't think you're defined by your degree. I think that applies to all walks of life, not just journalism. Like, if you really want to do something, you really want to make that your career, you'll do whatever it takes. You'll put in the hard hours. You'll do, all the sleepless nights and everything like that, blood, sweat, and tears, quite literally, to carve out a niche for yourself and something that you actually want to do. So yeah, I completely agree with Tom that it is very much about, when one door closes, another one will open, and you will then eventually end up doing what you want. You just got to keep bashing, keep trying, and eventually people will start listening.
So you mentioned finding your own niche just there. So do you think boxing and MMA is the niche, or it's just your contacting and your networking ability that is the niche? Like if you were tomorrow to suddenly be a rugby fan, would you think you'd be able to use the same skills in building that rugby network, or is there something specific to boxing and MMA that you needed to get in there?
I think I probably could apply both. I think purely because I wouldn't. I mean, if you look at me, you wouldn't think, oh, he's a massive hardcore MMA boxing fan, right? But stereotypically, of course. But
I mean, you're not stood up, Tom. You could be 7 feet
yeah,
tall.
exactly. I could be ripped to shreds. No, I'm joking. I think that does kind of play into my advantage a little bit because because I almost can't relate to these guys who are stepping in the ring. That makes me want to learn a bit more about it and have that kind of understanding and learn the raw aspects of the sport. Like I love nothing more than going to an MMA gym and watching these guys roll on the mats, or kick the bags, or stand and do ridiculous like drilling techniques like any of the one championship stuff. I love that. I find that so fascinating because it's something that is almost alien to me. I think having transferable skills, especially in journalism, I think networking is just something you're either good at it or you're not. And I think if you want to be a good journalist, you've got to be good at talking to people, and you've got to be good at approaching other people and getting their opinions, getting their advice, getting their takes on the latest trending news or whatever. So I do think it's quite transferable. But for me, I don't think I can't envisage a world where I'm not covering boxing and MMA. So it's kind of hard for me to think, right? Because I do dabble. I do occasionally do like NFL, like interviewing NFL stars and things like that. But I only do it because I love the conversation. If I have to cover a sport, of course I'll be covering fight sports because it's just, it's my thing.
That's great. That's that you've got your passion and you've got that as an output. I wanted to ask a little bit. You talked about kind of how you learn as much as you could about the sport, whether it's trying to immerse yourself in the gym with them, or I think for me that was something that stood out for me. I mean, I went to MotoGP knowing very little about motorbikes. I'm now at Barca, and okay, I knew quite a bit about football, but probably no more than the average person. Certainly, nothing amazing about Barca. So I had to sort of dedicate time to learning about these sports, learning about these people, learning about the history. And there's a lot there. Once you start scratching the surface of any sport or any athlete or any team, there's an awful lot there. Do you think there's something, and I'm maybe framing this with like MMA is a long way from history and politics, in an ability to learn, because I know that I'm a good learner. I know I can sit myself down with a stack of books or resources about any given topic and completely immerse myself in it and absorb it. Is there anything that kind of you do in your preparation? You said you prepared for this podcast. I think preparation is a huge thing in this world. Is there anything that kind of you do in terms of learning and preparing for this kind of the work that you do?
So I'll tackle this two ways. I'm quite lucky in the sense that, again, it's almost from the journalism point of view. I have a couple of decent mentors, or really, really great mentors, actually, who I can go to for advice in terms of maybe how to approach a subject or how to interview someone who maybe I'm particularly a bit cautious of. So I think that's really, really invaluable. But when I'm talking about MMA, I think when you're covering a sport that is so technical and there's so many different elements of it, like you just mentioned MotoGP and F1 and things like that, I really do think you have to go to a local garage or whatever and immerse yourself in finding out the components of a car in much the same way you do with a fighter. Like if I'm trying to study a fighter, to give you an example, Josh Taylor, going to Josh Taylor's gym, watching how Josh Taylor trains, the little Richard Riakporhe, he trains in Loughborough, going to Loughborough, looking at how he trains with, and Angel Fernandez and whatever, seeing how they use the different fine-tuning techniques to perfect the sweet science. That's what I love. Like I love the technicalities of it all, and each boxer and each fighter is completely different from everyone else. They all say they're not. They all say, we come from the same gym, but everyone has their own different mannerisms. And I love that. I mean, Anderson Silva is still fighting now. and he's doing like things that are completely different to what everyone else is doing. And I love seeing these fighters in the environment, say at a big gym like Sanford or something, and they're all completely different, doing completely different things, completely different techniques. But ultimately, they are the same people. They come from, maybe similar backgrounds. They all have the same burning ambition to be the best, to be the top of their sport. And that's something that I love. I love understanding not only how they do it, but why they're doing it, who they're doing it for. Maybe that, a lot of it is often involved with family. I love that personal element. I love almost the sacrifice they have to make every day, because at the end of the day, it's fight sports. You don't know in what shape you're going to leave the sport, but it's why they put their bodies on the line that, for me, fascinates me the most. Sorry, that got really, really dark.
Yeah, no, it's good. We're recording late at night, so maybe we're more into that mood than if we'd been recording it in the morning. So it's really, really interesting examples you gave about what added value can be given from going to the gyms, because even if you aren't writing a story directly from the gym, you're learning more, you're building your own knowledge for the future. So how long did the pandemic last in that sort of thing? For how long were you kept out of the gyms, or were you somehow been giving video tours of the gyms?
So, funny story. Here we go. The first of many. When was it? It was. So, I'm sure you boys, maybe Jamie in particular, are aware of a certain fighter called Ian Gary. Who just made his debut in the UFC. He's been widely compared to Conor McGregor, a certain Mr. Notorious, for very good reason as well, because he's a bloody damn good fighter. But anyway, I messaged his lovely manager later saying I would love to interview Ian. Got the great platform to showcase his wonderful abilities. And I didn't realize that he was actually in Florida at the time. So it was like, it must have been about 10 o'clock at night, which isn't particularly late, but it was a bit late. Anyway, cut long story short, he was running a little late. So it got to about 11 and I'm sat there on the Zoom call. Anyway, Ian Gary shows up. I'm thinking, okay, you don't look like you're in, your house in the island. Where are you? Turns out he's actually in Sanford MMA, which is this amazing superstar, like Premier League level MMA gym. And he decides to randomly give me a guided tour of the like just literally picks up his laptop and just, carries this iMac around going, oh yeah, this is, Henry Hooft, here's Anthony Rumble Johnson. Henry Hooft's coming on this call going, oh, hello, nice to meet you, all that kind of thing. I think Gilbert Burns was rolling on the mats, like all these like amazing high level fighters. But it was just so spontaneous. And it kind of, for me, funny you should say about being out of the gyms. I have been out of the gym, well, since January. We weren't allowed in, I wasn't allowed in MMA or boxing gyms till probably about May, June, something like that, when the gyms reopened, of course. And even then, access was so tight because, COVID's still a thing. Boxers aren't, don't want to pop positive in case that jeopardizes their big fight and whatever. So it was really, really tough. But the beauty of Zoom was as we're doing right now, you can, jump on a call and chat to anyone. But it was so, what I loved about the interview with Ian was just, it was so natural. Like it wasn't staged at all. It was just, this guy picking up his laptop and showing me all these amazing fighters just doing their thing. It was a whole new experience for me, especially because he's on the other side of the world. Like I wasn't even thinking about the dodgy connection or the dodgy pixels or whatever. It was so raw and authentic that in a weird way I'm kind of glad that I actually wasn't there with him, because it gave me even more insights. Like they have this drink, so another funny, they have this drinks counter on the side of the bar or the little rest area. And it's always empty because apparently it's like the nicest drink in like the whole of Florida or whatever. And they always get like restocked and everything, but it vanishes within like an hour. So Ian goes over to this cabinet going, oh, I'm going to show, oh, it's not there anymore. It's all gone. And then like 5 or 6 other fighters come in, looking for this nectar of the gods, and it's not even there either. So, but I love that. That's what you get a lot with boxing and MMA gyms as well. There is this real brotherhood and this kind of, they're probably, some of them might even fight each other at the end of the day, and in the UFC or in Bellator or whatever. But they're all bonded by this tribalistic nature. Yeah, it's amazing. It's really it's something that you just kind of. I think a lot with like. In fact, I was saying this to someone the other day. Maybe I'm talking a bit out of turn here, but maybe a lot of footballers, because of the money incentive and everything, they're not necessarily attached to a club in the same way as a fighter is maybe attached to a gym, because of the fact that these guys are like literally punching each other in the face every day, getting up, doing the same thing, rinse and repeat, and the money maybe isn't at the same kind of level as maybe like a Marcus Rashford or someone like that. They're not earning that kind of wage, but they're all fighting to earn Mayweather money. So it's kind of, I think it really does build this kind of unspeakable bond between them, which is just, I mean, every time I go into a gym, I'm just fascinated by all the little relationships and all the pointers, that coaches are giving out, going, oh, hang on a second. There's this, even just the other day, a coach was saying, oh, this young prospect here, he's been training with Richard Comey in Ghana. He's now come back over to the UK. He's one to watch out for. All those little nuggets of information are just so invaluable for what I do, and I guess that's why I love it so much, because I'm just always constantly learning on the job.
Yeah, there's a certain sort of relationship that you build when you're trying to kill each other every day, I guess.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Yes.
No, I mean, certainly, I've practiced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a very amateur level, like once or twice a week at best, but you do form very strong bonds with people that are trying to choke you to death. It happens. No, it's an interesting point about COVID, and you said you were in the office for a couple of weeks, and then the pandemic happened, and like you and everybody else, I've been working remotely, and there's something interesting about that, in the sense that we're kind of reporting on or narrating these things that happen, but we're not doing it with our own eyes. And for me, I noticed the difference when we were allowed back in I've not commentated in the Camp Nou, but I was commentating in the Johan Cruyff Stadium where the women's team play, and there's something different about being there and living the experience that you don't get remotely. But then your story is quite interesting, because on the other side of it, you had this experience that you probably wouldn't have had if you'd have turned up with your microphone and your notepad in the gym. They'd probably been like, yeah, sit in the corner there and don't talk to anyone. It's it's got, I guess, two sides to the coin there. It's quite nice, anecdote that.
There's probably an even better example. So I mentioned him earlier, Anderson Silva. And this was early. This was like within the first couple of months of me, taking on this new role. Again, this is something that I'm going off on a tangent, but another thing that's so important is, with your contacts book, PR, build a good relationship with PR agencies, build a good relationship with PR representatives, and your life will be so much easier in whatever you're covering in journalism. Just make sure you get on well with the PR teams. And it turns out, thankfully, that I get on really well. And it also helps, when they're trying to help you out as well. I mean, I've got to give a massive shout out to Jen Wank, because without her, none of this would have been possible. But I randomly got this email saying, would you like to interview Anderson Silva? Me immediately goes, well, 100%. I'm not going to turn down an opportunity to interview the GOAT. Like, it just kind of, he never really does UK media either. So it was kind of a bit of a one-off. And I just speculatively replied, going, oh yes, that'd be fantastic. Basically, when? In the next 5 minutes. And it turned out that it was actually on that day. And I thought, I'll probably get 10 minutes with him. No, I ended up having 2 hours just sat talking to the great Anderson Silva. Me literally in my bedroom, sat in a Juventus top with a baseball cap on backwards, because it was at the time when the barbers weren't open and we had terrible trims and all that kind of thing. So I was trying to cover up what I could. But there was just, as you say, it's an experience that I probably wouldn't have had if I'd been in the States, because he's got hundreds of PR people around him going, right, you've got to talk to ESPN and whatever. And obviously we're a big outlet in GiveMeSport, but I understand, sometimes access can be restrictive. And it was also at a time when he just left the UFC. So it was before his boxing match, his first boxing match. Or should I say third, but his more recent one, his comeback fight. And I just could not believe that he'd given me so much time, and he was just so polite and so understanding that it made my life so much easier as well. And then I interviewed him again because he enjoyed the interview so much. So again, it's just so important to build, relationships with these fighters, and just a massive thank you to Jen and Anderson for giving me the time of day, really, because I mean, they weren't to know that I was, just this little kid in Chichester interviewing the greats, or one of the greats. But no, it is. I always say that Zoom is both a blessing and a curse, because you don't get that. There's something different being in the same room as someone, but in that case, when he's fighting in LA, and I probably wouldn't have got a flight to LA just to interview him, it was really, really amazing. And I sometimes pinch myself thinking, did it really happen? Because again, at the end of the day, I'm a fan. I think that's something that's so important as well. You kind of, maybe you can relate to this as well, Jamie. When you're covering a sport, if you're a fan of that sport, or if you're a fan of that team, or if you enjoy that team, or if you enjoy that fighter, it makes it so much easier to cover, because you're almost writing from the heart. You're writing from from a place that you can relate to. And I don't mean relate to in the sense that I can relate to, Anderson Silva front kicking Vitor Belfort on the face, but I can relate to the fact that I've watched his highlight reel. I've pretty much watched all his fights since probably about 2015. So it did feel a bit more special, because I'm meeting one of these guys who at the end of the day is one of my heroes, and it was just incredible to me. But it's really important to build these relationships, and it is really important to enjoy it whilst you're doing it, because at the end of the day, you're going to retire at some point, and when you look back on all these memories, you'll have this massive catalog to look back on. And I think that's something that's really important as well. It's not. I mean, money's great and everything, but experiences last so much longer. Some of the experiences I've had in the past 3 months, going to boxing shows, going to MMA shows, Bellator London, and all that kind of stuff, it's things I'll remember for the rest of my life. In the middle of a pandemic, when everything is, the world has just gone crazy. We've got all these restrictions and everything, and I'm getting a chance to interview Anderson Silva in my bedroom. It is utterly bizarre, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yes, this is more of a question to both of you. So I'm putting on my hat of the listener. So you said you're such a big Anderson Silva fan. You're interviewing him in bed, and Jamie, I saw you met Danny Alves last week. Do you get nervous, or are you so professional that you can put the fanboy to one side and do the job? Or what's the ratio between nerves, excitement, and professionalism, would you say? Yeah, so Jamie, you go first.
You go first, Jamie. You go first.
Okay. It depends. There's an element of it that's kind of you're there to get a job done, I think, is, and I met Pedri earlier this week as well, which for me was kind of more exciting than meeting Danny Alves, because Danny Alves is huge, but Pedri's kind of upcoming. It's quite exciting where he's at, and I was like, what's this 18-year-old going to be like, But I think you go into it first and foremost. It's there's an interaction, a transaction that has to take place, and he knows that, and I know that, and the quicker you can kind of smoothen that over with a bit of preamble chat and then get it done with in the best way possible, I think that helps everyone. And then after that, you get the opportunity to kind of be the fanboy and say, "Oh, can I have a picture with you?" In my opinion, that's the kind of the way I've done that. I think Danny Ellis is probably one of the more famous people I've met, actually, but I've met a handful of famous people, and at no point have I felt kind of nervous. But I have I've felt the pressure of having to get the job done that I need to get done with this person, and that they have a kind of a positive experience of it as well, because I think you never know when you have to meet them again.
It's
Tom,
it's so important to make a good impression. From
Anderson Silva's a huge name.
Well, it's so important to make a good impression, because, as you say, and it's amazing in our industry the amount of people who know each other, and bad news travels just as fast as good news. So you got to make sure you get off on the right footing. Danny Alves, though, oh my god, that's amazing. That's so cool. But you got to kind of. I think they know at the end of the day, and I don't mean that in you're a fanboy or whatever, but I think they know, you appreciate them, and you enjoy what they've done in their career and all that kind of thing. And that's totally fine, by the way. I don't really understand this whole stiff upper lip, snooty approach. To me, that's not, and I always find that I have a much better experience when, the fighter or the athlete kind of understands where you're coming from, when you're making it a bit more lighthearted, a bit more jovial. I always try to cover positive news, I guess, is probably the best way of putting it, which in MMA, I'll tell you, it's bloody difficult. But I do always try and, when I'm interviewing someone, at least put a positive spin on things, and try and just make it easier for them, because at the end of the day, they have to do however many hours of media. And it always, it's important not to be selfish, because you've got to realize, these guys are doing 20, 30 hours a week talking to people like us. And I think it's always important to make it as easy as possible for them, so that when they go on to the next one, they're feeling in a bit of a good mood. Especially if you're on availables and it's one every 10 minutes and you're just one of number 50 or whatever. It's just really important to kind of take a bit of a step back and let them and reassure them in a way that I'm just here to get some quotes from you that aren't maybe a bit inflammatory or whatever. And just tell your story. I feel like that's so important. Telling people's story in the right way, rather than trying to get an agenda. Or I feel like if you go into an interview with maybe I'm talking rubbish here, but if you go into an interview with an agenda and you want to get something out of it, I can guarantee you're probably not going to get as much content. Like I say about preparation, when I go into an interview, I've got like the general idea of what I want to ask, but I never have like a concrete list of questions, or right, I'm going to get this angle out of this person. Because it ends up, when you have a conversation with someone, actually you tend to get far more information out of them than when you essentially interrogate them and have them over a barrel. Like it's completely different, especially with boxers, because they're not necessarily media trained. So in a way that makes your life even harder, because you're not going to get your standard replies of, oh yeah, I'm going to bingo him in the first round or whatever. You're going to get something which is just a bit more raw and a bit more honest, but also it makes the barriers even harder to break down, because at the end of the day, they think, you're going to write a tabloidy headline or whatever about, and maybe something will get misconstrued. I think that's so important with my interviews or with my writing, I always try and write it in an emotive way. So if a boxer's feeling happy, I kind of try and get that tone to show through the piece. I wrote one the other day, Richard Riakporhe, and what I love about Richard is he's just so cool, calm, and collected. And it sounds so cliche, but every fight week, everyone else is rushing around doing all these different things. You got lighting here, camera here, all boxing promoters flapping and all that kind of thing. But the guy who's the main event, who's got all the pressure on him, is literally like a sea of calm. He walks into the room and everyone's just like, he's just come out of a nap or something. It's just completely real. And I love that. I love that authenticity. And I think it's so important, because if you do come at it with an angle, you're probably actually killing an angle that you probably could have got if you made the conversation a bit more free and a bit more open. So I think being fluid as a journalist is so important when you're speaking to someone, because don't go in there thinking, all right, I've got to get that headline out of them, because you might actually be restricting yourself from a headline that you could actually get if you approached it from a different way that you might not even be thinking of at that moment in time until 5 seconds before you start chatting.
Yeah, so it's just on you go, Jamie. No, we didn't interrupt each other for a few weeks. So back to the old standard.
Well, no, I just wanted to give from my sort of experience, the kind of context to people that might be listening, that this does happen. People go to do interviews, journalists or producers or whoever, with like the documentary already made, and it's like, I need this person to talk about X, and I need him to say, it's basically already scripted and the questions are phrased in such a way that it's like, I have to get them to say this in this way because I've got the rest of the video made. Like it happens, and I think that for me surprised me perhaps when I got into this world a little bit, because I didn't think that happened, and I thought everything was kind of like how you look at you watch a documentary and everything kind of like unfolds, and the guy that's like presenting the documentary is like, oh wow, we found this person. It's like, no, it's all scripted. and so it does happen that these media events, people will use 2 of their 3 questions trying to get a specific soundbite that they've basically already pre-scripted, and then the third question will just be some throwaway, how are you looking forward to the match, or how are you looking forward to the fight or whatever. So that's quite interesting, that you kind of you take a bit more of a personal approach to it maybe, and try and get. I've got a question to follow up, but if you want to go, Stuart, with what you
what I was just gonna say is that what the interviews you've been talking about, these personal sort of agenda-free interviews, what format do they end up? Are these video interviews that you upload as videos, or are these all? I saw on your LinkedIn you're writing 12 stories a day sometimes. So are you breaking up the interviews into the 12 different stories, or what's the output from these 2-hour sit downs with fighters?
That's a really good question, and I would say it completely varies depending on what kind of mood the fighter's in. No, I tend to do my general rule of thumb is I'll do a long form feature. So I don't know, 1,000 words maybe, and I'll do a couple of spin-off interviews, which are just what I like to call the trimmings of the roast dinner, the bits that I can cobble together and get some sort of theme out of them. But yeah, and then I'll put them out on the website, and they'll go to our Facebook page and whatever. And then we'll also have, some video interviews that go out on the Instagram, and maybe someone go on TikTok, depending on what kind of things I can get. But yeah, I don't try and tailor the interview to the to a specific format, because most of my interviews are done on Zoom. So theoretically, I can kind of turn them into whatever I want. I could turn them into a podcast. I can turn them into an article. And I think that is really important, actually. Try and get as much out of that content as possible. Like there are some interviews that I've done that are like months old, which I've actually thought, oh, hang on, something that he said there or something that she said there could be quite relevant to what's happening at the weekend, and just stitching that two together and making that connection. It is about thinking on your feet and thinking, right, maybe I've got targets to hit. Maybe I've got, an event coming up. How can I get the best out of that specific bit of content? Because a lot of the time, if you're going through your archive, you've probably got gold sitting in there that you haven't even really thought about. So I do quite enjoy going back and listening to some of the old interviews, thinking, good God, I was terrible back then. So probably I'll do the same with this interview in in like a year or so when I've done more podcasts. But no, probably not. I'm really, really enjoying myself. But yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, don't throw away anything, because you never know when you might actually need it. And do try and, I think, because again, I've taught myself to video edit. I've taught myself to film cameras and all that kind of thing. A lot of my skills are self-taught, and I think that's really important as well. Like, as a journalist, you've got to be able to do it all in this day and age, in this social media driven age. You've got to be able to create, even if you're not very good at it, as long as your basic skills are decent, you'll be fine. As long as it's passable. I always like to say, as long as I'm passable in something, that's a good win. But it is so important to be well-rounded. I think that applies to all walks of life. Be a well-rounded individual, and it will make your opportunities and your avenues so much easier to get through, because you never know where you could end up. And that's the thing about journalism, isn't it? You could be covering football one day, and then you could actually jump to people punching themselves in the face, or punching each other in the face for a living themselves. That'd be a weird sport. That would be a Triller sport.
People would watch it. People would watch it.
That's something Triller would put on, 100%.
You've given loads of advice already, loads of good tips for people that are looking to get into sport media. People would dream of having your job. I know people that are stuck in an office writing reports all day long, and they'd love to be able to sit down and chat with these huge names. Do you think there's something about you? Because you sitting here, we've having this great conversation. I'm enjoying myself a lot. This is the first time we've met, really. We've exchanged messages for a while now, but this is the first time we've really kind of had a conversation. And I think you're very personable, very, positive. And do you think there's something about you that has helped you get to where you are and do what you do? And is that something you've worked on?
Gosh.
Sorry to.
No, I hate
to
talking
break
about
you
myself. So it's kind of a weird situation. I think what maybe not necessarily sets me apart, because that's so wrong, but something that I like to do a bit differently is whenever and I'll apply it to interviews, first of all. Whenever I'm interviewing someone, and it's actually part of this project I've got separately, which I'll probably talk about, I always try and make the interview like someone else could be doing it. So when I write it, it's almost like the reader's thinking, I could be that person, talking to Michael Bisping, talking to Anderson Silva, talking to Israel Adesanya. And I think that that anonymity helps me in a way, because the readers seem to enjoy it, so that's great. But also it means that when I'm writing it, it makes it so much more conversational. And I do try to, build a rapport with these fighters and build a rapport with their liaisons and the governing bodies and the UFC in particular. I've got a great relationship with the people at some of the brass at the UFC, and I think that's really important. So I'm not really sure what I do differently, but I think I just try to be me. At the end of the day, and that's so cliche, but I am just, as it says on the tin, I'm not a boxer, I'm not a fighter, but I don't pretend to be. I just want to understand why they're doing it, and I want to tell their stories in the right way. And that is the thing for me. I don't want to spin a narrative or, sell something that I shouldn't be selling, or construct a fake news type story or a clickbaity angle or anything like that, because it's just not in my nature. I always used to be, when I was younger, my nickname used to be Little Judge, because I always used to get annoyed with people who, tell false lies and all that kind of thing. I feel like that's always stuck true with me now, which maybe probably doesn't help with the job that I'm doing. But when you're like, when you work in the media, it's really hard. It's really important to build a character or build a persona, but it's also equally important to make sure that it's as real as possible. And I like to say that I don't really have I'm not an Ariel Helwani. I'm not a Gareth A. Davis. And I look up to those guys. And I think that's really important as well. I think you got to have, your inspirations. You got to have people who can act as mentors. You got to have these people who you can almost hope to emulate and hope to achieve the similar success. But it's also really important to create your own kind of character. Because at the end of the day as well, I think what a lot of people don't realize is there's a difference between being a journalist and then there's a difference between being a personality. But you can actually be both. You can be a journalist and you can be a personality, and you can, almost play make-believe. And when you're interviewing someone, pretend to be something that you're not. And maybe that gives you a bit of security or whatever, I don't know. But I don't try to do that. I just, I'm just me, and love it or hate it. I can't see myself changing. So I guess that's the thing. I do try to be approachable and personal, and I want to make the fighters' lives easier. So why would I be any different? Why would I be hardline? Why would I throw an angle at them that they're not going to like, when at the end of the day, they're the ones who are, the face of the sport, who've got the access and all that. Because that's so important. I think without your contacts working, without, access to these guys or girls, your chances are so limited. And keeping that access door open is a lot harder, believe me, than it seems. Especially when you've got promoters to please and PR liaisons to keep in line. It's really important to just not try to piss anyone off. And I don't mean that in the sense that that doesn't mean that you can't cover some of the hard hitting stuff, and you can't. But you got to do it in a way that is impartial. I think impartiality is so important, especially in fight sports. I really struggle to pick favorites, even when British fighters are fighting. I really struggle to, and that's not saying that I don't support the Brit, because obviously in your heart you're always going to support the Brit, but or at least I am. But I really try and stay as impartial as possible, especially when you're interviewing one opponent one week or one day, and you're interviewing the other guy or the other girl the next day. It does get very, very tricky, especially if you're actually closer to one fighter or whatever. It is really important to keep that journalistic integrity and to stay as impartial as possible, because you never know when it's going to bite you on the ass. So don't put all your eggs in one basket, is what I'm saying, basically.
So that's finally your politics degree coming in use.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just a wolf in sheep's clothing. Who knows?
So yes, but we certainly learned a lot already from you so far, Tom. It's been really great having you on. So again, networking has been a theme of, we've had a few guests already talk about it. So I think I asked Tom whether it was like Tinder. Did you have a classic opening line for networking? Do you have something, or is it just, as you've been saying, do you go in there, meet somebody, be yourself, and see where it takes you?
So what I like to do is, especially if I actually like that person's content, or if they're a boxer for stuff or whatever, I always try and go, oh, it was really cool when you did so and so. So when I actually no, this is an even better story. So when I introduced myself, it was when I first met Gareth A. Davies for the first time, in the great Gareth A. Davies of Talksport, Alberta, London. I kind of got the dress code a bit wrong. It's probably the best way of putting it. So I didn't realize that it wasn't, my visage. When I first got into journalism, I had this great, wonderful vision of, Fleet Street, clutching 100 papers, satchel over your shoulder, running down the tube, hair all over the place. So maybe nothing's changed there, but, scatterbrained.
Little press tag in your hat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Tweed suit and everything. So I got myself a tweed suit. And I turned up to Bellator in this, lovely grey country suit. I live literally in the country, so it's quite normal for me. But yeah, everyone else was in, hoodies and everything like that. So I stuck out like a sore thumb. But Gareth Davies liked it, so there was my angle. I went, I'm glad you like my dress. And we had a great conversation about ties and suits and all that kind of thing. And then just started picking his brains a bit. So that's how I usually approach journalists. It's either, I dress like an idiot, or I like their article. Or, I mean, even with Jamie, the way me and Jamie started talking, because I really enjoyed Jamie's translation for the Lionel Messi press conference, especially when I happened to be covering it on that day. So there's an example for you. It's really important to, and it's not ego stroking, but you've got to have a common, a theme or something that, like, it is admiration. A lot of the time, you do enjoy that piece, or you do enjoy that bit of content, or you enjoy the way the fighter approaches his fights or something. Like, there's got to be that angle, or because without that, how do you get the conversation going? I mean, again, maybe you do have like a funny Tinder one-liner or something, which is amazing, by the way. Maybe I should probably work on that. But yeah, you got to have that kind of hook, or which I guess is the same with your articles. You've got to have that lead. You've got to have that thing that makes people want to click. And LinkedIn, especially. I mean, you do get a lot of LinkedIn DMs, which are just very copy and paste, and maybe that's probably the wrong approach. But especially with social media, you're probably getting hundreds of messages a day. So you got to try and personalize it. And having said that, even if someone does copy and paste a message to me, I can't help but have a little bit of a cheeky response. So there is that kind of engagement as well. But it is very much about finding that hook and building up that and striking up a friendship with people. It's in a day and age where everyone's so or I say everyone, where social media has made society a bit more ruthless and have a bit more spite in itself. It's really important to be friendly and nice to people. That gets you a long way as well. Just buy someone a coffee, or go for drinks with someone, or jump on a Zoom call with someone, even if you don't really know where that conversation is going to lead. It's amazing what happens from like the smallest acorn. You just don't know where that tree or that branch is going to go. So there's the poetic analogy for you.
No, that's great. And I think you're right. I think, well, I mean, our little interaction that we had over the summer, I think when you mentioned that, I'd completely forgotten that that's how we connected. But it worked both ways, it was sort of like, oh, who's this guy? And I had a look and I was like, wow, he interviewed Michael Bisping. Like, like that's pretty cool. And I had a read of some of your articles. I was like, okay, this could be an interesting contact. And then look at us now, it's we're recording an episode of our podcast together. And Stuart and I had a similar, we had a touch point from, we went to high school together. We weren't in the same year, but we had a sort of a contact point there, and we just got talking again, and turned out we had a lot in common. It was like, actually, we start a podcast. Like, yeah, let's do it. Like, you never know where these things are going to end up, and ultimately, there's very little to lose. You send a message to someone on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever. The worst that happens is they ignore you, right? Or maybe the worst that happens is they shoot you down and make you feel bad. But big deal.
Asking for advice is so important as well. I feel like people. In fact, I'm guilty of this. I at the start of I was so afraid to ask for help because I thought that it would be I thought I'd be perceived negatively, like, oh my God, you can't do your job properly. Like, what are you doing? Why are you asking for help? But it actually kind of makes people trust you a bit more, because it's like, oh wait, no, you're human as well. Everyone is afraid of something. And if you are, and in fact, I was saying to, not name dropping, but I was speaking to John Fury the other day about Tyson's.
It's too late to say you're not name dropping.
Well, there is a reason. There is a method in my madness. So I was speaking to John Fury briefly about this fight that's coming up, and how Tyson came back from the dead against Deontay Wilder, and then beat him up twice. Like, and I was saying, like, how with all the struggles and the turmoil and the inner turmoil that Tyson went through, like, how did he come through the other end? And he said, well, he just went and asked for help. And I think you can literally apply that principle to your work. If you want to get better at something, I mean, it's like school, right? Like, if you want to get better, well, not in my case because I didn't, but and I really didn't get better. But you do ask a teacher, like, for advice or for pointers, and I think that's really important in journalism. Like, if you find that mentor figure, and I'm lucky because, I mean, my boss Martin, like, I can go to him whenever, and I find that so invaluable. Editors, the two Robs and Alex Batt as well, it's really important to have this kind of little bubble around you, which you can just bounce ideas off. And I think that's actually something that maybe we were talking about Zoom earlier, and talking over Teams or whatever. I think the thing that kind of not wounded me, but kind of got to me a bit more about being stuck at home all the time and not being in the office was not being able to bounce ideas off people. Because when you're on Slack and whatever, it's not the same as if you're in an office sat next to someone and you're writing an article and you're like, oh, I can't think of that hook, or I can't think of that final paragraph. Like, how do I get that little bit of detail out? There's no soundboard. Text and computer screens are far less easy to deal with than actual people. So yeah, just ask for help. I do say this. I really do mean this to a lot of people who, maybe people who are in a similar position, who came out of university, didn't know what they were doing. Maybe people who, come out of GCSEs, don't know what they're going to do. Before that, whatever. Like, just ask for help. If you want to do something, find someone who's doing what you're doing and ask them, right, how did I get into it? How did you get into doing what you do? Maybe you want to be a landscape gardener. How does that landscape gardener start doing what they're doing? And just ask them for tips on how to get better and how to perfect your craft, because that's what we're doing. We're doing it constantly. I wouldn't say anyone is like, unless they're they've won countless awards. I don't think anyone's really truly believes they're the best or their work is perfect. I'm a constant perfectionist. I'm like, right, I'm scrapping that article's not going out, that I've spent hours writing this, and then getting it subbed or whatever. Like, that's really important. Just the feedback, getting feedback on anything is so important, but especially when it comes to your work, and especially in what we do, because there's so many different holes you have to jump through, all these legal issues and all the things you don't even think about when you first become a journalist. It's like, oh gosh, hang on, I'd better not put that out there in case I get sued for slander or what, like all that kind of thing. It's really important to have the people around you who support you and can guide you in the right way, no matter where you are at in your career. I do always say, like, if anyone wants to reach out, like, from all walks of their careers or whatever, like, my DM's are always open. I don't have any other social media other than LinkedIn, but that's pretty much always open. Or my email or whatever. Because again, I understand how hard it is to break into an industry that is very, very competitive. But at the end of the day, a lot of people should be benefiting from it. Like, it is fun what we do. I mean, we wouldn't be doing it if we didn't. It is a really fun job, and it's very, very competitive, which is probably why it's so, perceived so negatively sometimes. But when you're actually in it, when you're deeply involved, there really is nothing better than going to a football game and covering it, or watching Messi score a screamer at Camp Nou or something. Like, there's all these little moments of magic, but you've also got to think about there'll be people down the line in generations to come or whatever, or even the same generation, who maybe just need that little bit of extra help. And you never know, even a little bit of advice, like, oh, maybe you should be taking notes or something, or this is how you transcribe, Otter's a great service, use that. Like, all these little extra bits of detail, you just never know how much that's going to help someone. In fact, Otter, that's a funny one. I hadn't even heard of the thing, and now I don't ever not use it. So they should probably give me a sponsorship. Well, I need a promo code.
I think you're right. I think having asked for advice and having been asked for advice, I think you'd be surprised how receptive people are and how willing people are. And certainly personally, I've received messages that say, hey, I'm this guy, I'm doing this, look at my work. And then I receive other messages that say, hi, I'm this guy, what do you think of my work? Or could you give me a bit of feedback on my work? I'm certainly more receptive to one than I am the other, So yeah, I think we've heard it on this podcast before, and I'm sure we'll hear it again. But I think it's a good moment to say, do reach out to people. People are receptive, and yeah, Tom's offered. I've offered, but several times. I'm sure Stuart would be happy for you to get in touch with him as well, and do reach out.
Yes, I guess maybe that's a joint lesson for today then from the three of us. If you want help, if you want to learn and guidance, just ask for it.
Tom, I feel like this interview could go on for another hour, and I'm sure you've got like 24 names that you want to drop still. Is there, before we wrap this up, is there anything else that you want to add? Sorry, Stuart, I'm talking over you again.
No, I was going to say that, yeah, when we were talking to Tom before, you joined Jamie before we went live. Tom, you telling us about your trip next week. Maybe you can finish with that just to make people even more jealous about your job and even more determined to follow your advice and hopefully get to where you are in the next couple of years.
Well, I kind of alluded to it earlier. I have the somewhat pleasure. I'm actually really, really excited. I'm going off to Florida from the 14th to 20th of December to cover a little known guy called Jake Paul and Tommy Fury in Tampa Bay. I was saying to Stuart before we started recording, I have no idea what an Esther was until about 24 hours ago. So sort of all that kind of stuff was a new experience for me. But yeah, you can make sure that I'm not going to shamelessly plug our channels, but you'll be able to find all the content and everything. Filming it all.
Do plug. Tell us where we can find you and find your work.
GiveMeSport.com. All the boxing MMA stuff is usually by me or some of the other wonderful writers. And yeah, I'll be doing like live blogs and interviews with all the names. I think I've even got access to Tommy's gym, which will be really, really exciting. And I can't wait because it's just, again, that's a whole new celebrity boxing, showbiz boxing. I'm not going to call it actual proper boxing because it's not, but you know, celebrity boxing is a thing. It's exciting, and it is quite funny with the way the pandemic's planned out. That it's my first American fight. Who would have thought that Jake Paul, Tommy Fury would be my first American fight week? Certainly not me. But I am very, very much looking forward to it. So yeah, hopefully the content will be good for everyone to enjoy.
Well, let's take the opportunity to wrap it up then.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Thanks very much for your time, Tom. It's been super, really, really interesting.
I apologize. I realised I rambled for like way too long.
No, it's completely
Don't
fine.
apologize at all because everything you've said has been absolutely great. There's been some real treasure troves of advice in there, and I can't wait to listen back to it myself and re-go over stuff. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing so candidly everything that you've learned and any tips for people wanting to get into this line of work in sport media.